Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Tim Kachuriak, and I'm the Chief Innovation and Optimization Officer for NextAfter, and we are absolutely thrilled you've made time out of your busy day to join us for what I think could be our very best webinar ever. So before we get started, I want to make a couple quick announcements as people are still filing in, and a couple housekeeping items. If you have not received an email from me or Paul or Nathan or Brady or somebody else from the NextAfter team informing you of the upcoming NEO Summit, the Nonprofit Innovation Optimization Summit, then where have you been? It's fastly coming upon us, September 27, 28 in San Antonio, Texas. We will be hosting the third annual Nonprofit Innovation and Optimization Summit. This year, we have an absolutely killer venue. It's at the Aztec Theater in the heart of San Antonio, right there on the Riverwalk, and we have got 18 speakers that are absolutely dynamite from really all over the world, featuring David J.P. Phillips, who's going to be talking about storytelling, coming all the way from Sweden. Carl Gillis from Belgium, who's probably one of the funniest conversion rate optimization guys I've ever met. The queen of copy optimization, Amy Harrison, as well as many, many, many others. So if you haven't yet, please go secure your tickets. And in fact, if you can pull the trigger quickly, you can take advantage of a special offer we have running through the end of July, where you can get 2 tickets. That's right, 2 tickets for the price of 1. So if you haven't yet, please head on over to niosummit.com for more information and to order your tickets. Now, a few quick questions that always come up, and I'm going to go ahead and address them right away. Are we making a recording of today's broadcast? The answer to that question is yes. And we will be sending that out immediately following, well, actually not immediately, probably towards the end of the day today, as well as with links to all of the experiments and resources that we cover during today's broadcast. And finally, we don't want this just to be a monologue or just a conversation between the speakers here. We want this to be an interactive conversation, and we want your questions. So if you haven't yet, please use the little question box whenever you have a question. If you haven't used it before, there's a little tool where you can insert your question. Those will be filtered to us towards the end of the broadcast, and we will address as many as we possibly can.
All right, so why do we focus on recurring giving? Well, there's one short answer, and it goes something like this. Recurring donors are worth 5.4 times more than one-time donors over their lifetime. That comes from Classy in the report, The State of Modern Philanthropy. Now, that should kind of be the beginning and the end of the conversation about why recurring giving is so important. But when you look out on the marketplace, at least my experience, it doesn't seem like enough time and attention is devoted to this. And so there's a lot of reasons why, but I think Harvey McKinnon, he's the author of Hidden Gold and kind of a forefather of monthly giving kind of around the world. He said this, that the single largest obstacle to successful monthly giving program is buy-in. And I think he's right. And so before we dive into the data, I just want to spend a little time here talking about recurring giving, kind of what it is and why it's important. So if you're not bought in, hopefully you'll be bought in. And if you're already bought in, hopefully this is some more ammo and content and context so you can get others bought in. All right, so 3 reasons. The first one is recurring donors are good for you. We already talked about how much more valuable they are than one-time donors. But if you actually look over a lifetime or a time period, you get a chart like this. This comes from the good folks at Target Analytics. They have this Sustainer Summit that has almost 40 organizations and 20 million donors and 61 million donations. And so it's a good litmus of kind of what's going on in recurring giving. And you see that this chasm or this delta continues to grow between sustainer or recurring revenue and single gift revenue over time. And that's because recurring giving focuses on this metric of lifetime value, which is the most important fundraising metric that there is. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to calculate it, but at its simplest root, there's 2 levers. You can either get people to give more in a year or give people to give longer. And so if we look at amount given, a misconception is that monthly giving is less than one time, and then you need them to give for years and years to break even. But that's not really what we find. Network for Good found that recurring donors give 42% more in 1 year than those who give one-time gifts. We also see that in our data and with our clients. So they give more per year, but then we also see the time given, where recurring donors are much more likely, more than 2 times likely actually, to be retained and give beyond 1 year. And if you extend that timeline from 1 year to say 5 years or 10 years, it starts looking like 4 times more likely, or even 9 or 10 times more likely to be retained. So you add those two things together, where they're giving more and giving longer, it leads to that huge increase in lifetime value, which again is imperative and critical to your fundraising. And so here's some more recent data from that Target Analytics group and the Sustainer Summit, separated by large, medium, and small, just comparing how much more valuable, again, recurring donors are compared to one-time donors. 3.7 times more for large, goes up to 12.4 times more for medium, and then 11.5 times more valuable over a 5-year period. So significantly more valuable. And another key point here is recurring donors seem to be even more valuable for small and medium-sized organizations, and we'll cover some of why that is. So it's hugely beneficial to your bottom line. And just in case that wasn't enough reason why it's good for you, there's some ulterior benefits, like the ability to build longer and better relationships. If people are giving with you more and receiving more communication, you have more time to get to know them, and can possibly lead to things like bequest or legacy giving. The revenue is more predictable, often on a monthly basis. So now you can budget. Your financial folks will love it. You can make better decisions into the future. And there should also be cost savings, right? Once you've acquired a recurring donor, in theory, you don't have to spend nearly as much kind of communicating and stewarding or reacquiring those lapsed donors that are always falling off the plate. You can save some money and focus on other project initiatives or more on acquisition, which isn't to say you shouldn't focus or spend money on your recurring donors. You should. You just don't need to spend as much. So those are some of the reasons why it's good for you. It's also good for donors. We're going to go to the science on this one. Thanks, Bill Nye. I'm going to highlight some experiments from this book, Science of Giving. The first one here, people were given $120, and they could give it all to one organization at once now. They could give it all to an organization later at the end of 12 months, or $10 a month for 12 months. So which do you think people chose the most? Well, it ended up 61.5% people chose to give $10 a month for 12 months. And what doesn't really make sense is if they wanted to kind of maximize the time value of money, where money is more valuable today than it is tomorrow, they should hold on to it all year and give it away at the end. Or if they wanted to help the charity, they should give it away right away. But they chose the kind of least efficient method of giving, the $10 a month for 12 months. And that's because paying in installments or on a recurring basis is just mentally convenient. We can kind of wrap our minds around it. It's easy for us to understand. Another study looked at happiness as people gave larger and larger donations, and they found that there's this kind of diminishing returns graph, where as giving goes up, the percentage or the rate of happiness kind of plateaus. So if you really wanted to make yourself the most happy and get rewarded with your charitable giving, in theory, you should be in this zone. You should be giving more frequently in smaller amounts, which is recurring giving. So recurring giving can kind of maximize that happiness and perceived impact of donors. So when you put it together, recurring giving is high convenience and high impact way for donors to give. And then the last key point here is recurring giving is growing and growing fast. So the M&R benchmark report found that recurring giving revenues grew 40% in 2017 from 2016. That Target Analytics group found that recurring giving has grown 70% since 2013. They also saw a big spike in direct recurring donor conversion, and especially digital direct recurring donor conversion. So those are some healthy underlying trends behind that. And then on the for-profit side, McKinsey & Company found that subscription e-commerce has been growing by more than 100% a year for the past 5 years. And if you think about your own purchasing behavior, Netflix, right? Things like Blue Apron, getting ingredients shipped to you. My wife and I have a Canadian version. It's awesome. Something like $1 a Month Shave Club, which was bought for $1 billion, or like Ipsy Box, these kind of curated things. Recurring giving and e-commerce purchasing is starting to grow rapidly and should continue to do so well into the future. So those are some ammunition for you about why recurring giving is so important. So that's why we wanted to study it, but here's what we did. We identified 100 organizations, actually 115 organizations. 106 actually could accept recurring gifts across 9 different verticals, and they ranged from kind of small organizations of $500,000 all the way up to organizations that had revenues of $3 billion. The average there's about 181 million. So kind of larger organizations across those different verticals. We ended up giving 3 different gifts from 3 different donors: a one-time donor, and then an upgraded donor where we gave one time and then we converted to recurring in the second month, and the third just went direct to recurring. We then monitored the communications across 4 different channels. So we looked at the offline, direct mail, email, phone calls, text messages across 3 months, so February, March, and April. And then we actually reported one card as lost and another as canceled to see what the process was that organizations had, or their tools or communications to kind of recapture or prevent that. And so then we analyzed the results. We looked at all these different communications and categorized them and put them into this big old study, which is what I'm going to share today. So there's so much in this study, so I highly encourage you to actually download the study after this, and you can dive deep on all the data. I'm going to try to highlight some of the things that were most interesting and to me or important, and what I think is most practical for you to kind of optimize your recurring giving programs. We'll have some ideas and insights that either we're testing and or I think you can test along the way. All right, so the first thing that we found is it's actually not that easy to find out where to make a recurring donation. In the end, roughly 1 out of 10 organizations that we had in the study did not have an option for recurring giving at all. All right, so here's the first insight. This one comes from Captain Obvious. Try having an option for recurring giving. All right, if you've seen how valuable they are, it's pretty easy to set up in terms of tools. Try having an option for recurring giving. All right, that was an easy one. But so we started all the donations from the homepage. So then we had to figure out, well, where do we go to make a donation? So we looked at the kind of buttons or call to action and found that the majority kind of had donate, then donate now, then give, and then support, and then kind of donate to org name. But finding that button we found was actually kind of surprisingly difficult. We found some examples like this, where we would kind of search the top navigation where we think this prime button or call to action should be. But lo and behold, we kind of had to dig all the way down into the footer to find out just where to make a donation. And this is why it's really important. We actually ran an experiment. This number 1698 here with Dallas Theological Seminary, where we wanted to see how does this button actually affect traffic. So here was the control. You can see kind of standard navigation. And then treatment 1, we kind of highlighted it and support DTS with a purple button. And treatment 2, we changed that text to donate, but it was still that purple button. And what we found is treatment 1 helped increase donations 160% just by calling that out. And actually treatment 2 led to even more increase in donations, 190% with that clear call to action and button. So it's helping people find what it is that they're looking to do. It sounds so simple, but if you don't have this, check out your website. One of the things you can do is try having a very clear donate button in your navigation. We also found that 3 out of 4 organizations do not have a separate call to action for recurring donations. So why that's important is we've actually done some experiments on kind of directing traffic with navigation to other things. So this is experiment 2325 with Texas State Historical Association. And here we have membership and resource. And then on the treatment, we said, well, some people are going to actually renew their membership and others are looking to just kind of get the membership in the first place. And so just by splitting that out in the navigation, we helped increase donation clicks or traffic 16%. Again, we're using the navigation to let people find what they want and nudge them towards kind of what we want. Or in this example, this is with Heritage Foundation. It's in our library, 6446, if you want to find it. This time we took over some real estate on the homepage and we wanted to highlight membership or the recurring giving program there. So in the treatment, you can see we had this box that kind of called it out, had some value proposition and how to become a member. And in this case, helped increase donations 46%. So the other thing that you can try doing here is adding a specific CTA or button for recurring gifts in your navigation and on your homepage. Here's an example from Food for the Hungry. You can see up top here how they have Sponsor a Child, which is their recurring giving program, different button color and highlighted. So if you're looking for it, boom, you can find it. And if you're not looking for it, you're kind of like, ooh, what is this big old button that I can click? So there's a couple things that you can try. And one of the things that we found is it wasn't super easy to find. Now, if you could find it, it wasn't entirely clear why you should become a recurring donor. So we talked a lot about value proposition. And for us, this is the value proposition question. This is the question you have to answer that donors are asking. Why should they give to you rather than some other organization or not at all? Now, when it comes to recurring giving, that question looks maybe a little bit more like this. Why should they give a recurring gift to you instead of a one-time donation and rather than some other organization or not at all? We kind of have to communicate the value proposition a couple times or make it clear why. So the vast majority of organizations had the option to give recurring, like we mentioned, but how they communicated that ranged all over the place. Different lengths of text, different styles, different words. So it's kind of hard to classify. So what we did is we kind of put it into 4 different buckets here, from simple to first person, value prop, and creative. And the majority of organizations here, about 70%, just under 70%, use something simple, something like this, where it's kind of a button that you could click while you were kind of going through the one-time donation flow. But if you ran into something like this, how does that help answer this question? Why they should give a recurring gift as opposed to one time, or rather just to the organization or not at all? Right? There's not a lot in there. If you've already made up your mind to give or to give monthly or recurring, it's not a bad option, low friction. But if you're on the fence and you don't know, there's nothing there to help convince or persuade or have you gain some understanding. So we found that only 9 organizations in the whole study, less than 10%, tried to do something in the way of value proposition to communicate value prop or why you should become a recurring donor. So here was one example. It was from the ACLU. So first, you can see this headline, "Become a Freedom Fighter." That was the named program. As an aside, only about 21% of organizations had a named program, which was kind of interesting. But then they go into their value proposition here about why you should and some bullets. Maybe they've taken one of our courses. It looks a lot like how we kind of suggest some donation pages. They have some images of either peers or people that you can help. Images can kind of go both ways, but this part is nice. They have some peer or some social proof of how many other people. And then what I want to highlight here is actually this monthly gift does even more to protect civil liberties, with an arrow kind of nudging you towards monthly. Something just as simple as that can try to kind of persuade or move someone towards understanding why they should become a recurring donor. We saw some other examples that kind of highlighted how a monthly gift is the best way to stand up to Trump's agenda, or a monthly gift shows your commitment, care, support to research, or it's efficient, convenient, and flexible, and you can support the poor every month. Those are just a few examples of how copy was used that we saw. And again, it was definitely the minority. But we think that's a big opportunity, because we've seen on donation pages in particular how adding value proposition and copy can really impact donor conversion. So this is an experiment with the Illinois Policy Institute. 6623 for those of you taking notes in your research journals. Here was the control and here was the treatment. I'll highlight the big difference here, and it's that. On the left, no copy. On the right, we had some copy. And just by communicating more about what the organization does, the value that they're providing, and what the donation would actually go and do, helped increase conversion rate 150%. So one of the things that we're trying with our clients, and we think you should be trying on your donation pages, is adding some value proposition copy in different types for recurring giving on your donation page. If people don't understand why they should do it, then of course they aren't going to select it. So that's one opportunity that we have. There's a few other ways that you can communicate value, and one that we saw that was kind of unique was kind of using impact handles. So this is Opportunity International. I actually interned with them in grad school. Fun fact, if you want to update my Wikipedia page, I actually don't have one, so don't worry about it. Anyways, here's what they did on the recurring giving page. They had this calculator where you could choose an amount, and then it would actually calculate how many mothers you could empower or provide for a family. And what's kind of neat about this is there's some science that can back this up. In this book, they talked about tangibility. And one of the studies was how organizations are framed tangibly or non. And when they were framed in a tangible way with a geographic focus, how money would be used and a problem being solved, donors gave 3 times more, just by positioning it as more tangible. That's something that those donation anchors can help with. They actually ran a follow-up study with the same organization. It was Oxfam, same project, just framed it tangibly versus intangibly, and donors gave almost twice as much to the project that was framed in a tangible way. We often say that clarity trumps persuasion. Yes, it's nice to kind of have all these arguments about how great you are, but fundamentally, if people do not understand what their donation will do and how it helps people, it's kind of all for naught. So be clear and be direct, and donation anchors could possibly help you. We actually ran an experiment with that. It was one of the variables we were looking at. This is 9145 with the National Breast Cancer Foundation. And so here was the control, kind of gift array, and then monthly donation amount with some copy. And then on the treatment, we were kind of testing 2 things. One was an open field, but then also the calculator of impact. And so we found that it helped increase conversion rate 60.5%. Now it's a yellow arrow because we didn't get enough of a sample size, but we had a directional lift and it was approaching statistical validity, which is always a fun thing to say. So we think it's worth testing again, and something that you can try to add in those gift impact handles for recurring gifts. All right, another thing that we looked at was, did the organization prompt donors to upgrade to a monthly gift? So not were they just passive in terms of allowing you to choose it, but did they actually kind of prompt you or make you make a decision? And we found that only 14% of organizations did. Now that ranged from simple, something like a toggle button, which you can see here. Is this a monthly gift? Yes, no, and then an array, or something more complex like a pop-up that came up right when you were about to complete your one-time donation that had some more value proposition and a suggested donation. Now we thought that was actually really interesting because it forces you to engage with this decision of, do I want to give monthly or not? It's kind of more aggressive, or it kind of, yeah, presents the value proposition. So we actually ran this test with Focus on the Family here. It's experiment 9024, where at the point of donation, we had this pop-up come up. And we made it so that it suggested 60% of what the one-time gift was as a recurring gift, or $15 a month was kind of the default gift if that kind of ratio didn't make sense. And what we found is that it helped increase recurring gifts 64%. Now, again, if you think of that lifetime value and that kind of chasm that exists, this is significant revenue down the line or over the lifetime just by adding this pop-up and presenting the option with some value proposition. The other key thing of note here is this pop-up did not significantly impact the likelihood of a person giving a one-time gift. That was a bit of our fear. It's kind of, are we talking them out of one-time gifts or upsetting them, and so they just, peace out and go on with their day? And we found that no, people continue on with their one-time gift, or we increased and got more recurring gifts. So we rolled that out on their donation page, and then we said, what if we roll this out kind of across their whole site, because they have some multiple donation pages or different places where you can make donations. And in this case, we found something similar, not quite as drastic, but a 24% increase in recurring gifts. And again, the pop-up did not significantly impact the likelihood of a person giving a one-time gift. So that is definitely something we think that you should try, is kind of the pop-up. And the kind of theory behind it is like we call it cognitive momentum, or think about a rocket ship taking off. The hardest part about launching a rocket, which I've never done, nor will I ever, but I'm sure, it's the takeoff, right? It's how do you get it in the air and in momentum, or like inertia? How do you just get it moving? Once it's moving, to kind of shift its direction is relatively easy. And that's kind of how we are about decision making. Kind of making the decision to like just go to the gym is the hardest part. Once you're actually at the gym, it's not that bad. Right, so it's the same kind of thing with how we make decisions. So people choose to make a donation, like, I like this organization, I want to support this organization. They're in momentum, and then this opportunity to become more valuable, or whatever the value proposition is, kind of just shifts them a little bit. So we think it's something worth trying. So you can try to add a prompt for recurring gift before one-time donation. And cognitive momentum is something we cover a little bit more in our donation and landing page course, which is free at nextchapter.com/landing page. All right, another thing we saw is that it wasn't that easy to actually set up a recurring gift. So we ended up getting blacklisted by multiple organizations for kind of being too generous or making too many donations, which shouldn't impact you or organizations that much throughout the year. But think about like December 31st or a Giving Tuesday or Giving Days, where this could become an issue, where people are making multiple donations and getting their cards declined. We were also asked for some very highly personal information, things like our spouse's names, which was kind of presumptive and intrusive. We thought that was kind of odd. Sometimes we had to answer questions that were confusing. Like this, we had to choose an agency location, and oftentimes this was required. So not only were we kind of confused about, well, what agency location, there was no default or no way to kind of bypass it. So this was adding quite a bit of friction to just kind of wanting to complete the recurring donation. Or we had to say yes or no to things that we have no idea what they mean, like I decline benefits. We didn't know what the benefits were. We didn't know if what we get by declining or what we gain by accepting. It did not make any sense. It was causing this decision friction. And then one of the worst things actually was how often we had to prove that we were human, that we just weren't some charitable giving robot cruising the internet and making donations. And so if you've done this, you often get the second step, which is this very fun game of choose the street signs. We ran into this quite a bit. And every time I see this, I think of the stand-up comedian John Mulaney. He's got a great bit on how we spend so much of our time telling robots that we're not robots just so we can look at our own stuff. It's pretty funny. I will say, though, it is not safe for webinar, so check it out on your own time. So does this even matter, this kind of confusion in forms and things like this? Well, here's just a couple examples from the research library that that makes me answer yes. So here's one where this is the exact same form fields. All we did was change the layout on the right. We just laid them out to be more horizontal, to use some of that space, limit the digital footprint, and make it easier on the eye. So people think, oh, that's actually a shorter form, I can fill it out. Helped increase donations almost 40%. Or in this case, the only difference here was that cell phone was required. What do you think that did? Help decrease donations 43%, right? People don't know what you're using the cell phone for. Why is it required? It's adding this friction and anxiety to the process. But we also ran into this quite a bit where there was a confirmation page. So after you kind of go through making your donation, there's one more step that kind of says, are you sure you want to actually do this? And just by removing that, in this example, we saw 176% increase in donations. So there was this kind of friction and confusing, unnecessary form fields and donation steps that should just be kind of eliminated. Right, here's one example of kind of a newer school, cooler way to set up a form where once people start filling out their name, it kind of expands and goes into more information. That's another way to kind of limit the digital footprint. But one of the ways to know if you have kind of bad forms or something like that is to actually make a donation, and in this case, a recurring donation to yourself. Again, we're trying to see, the study is about seeing things from the donor's perspective to understand what it's like to be a recurring donor. So why don't you go do that for yourself? And we actually have a tool that can help. It's the Friction Self-Assessment. So you go make a donation and kind of keep this up. We'll walk you through 20 questions. It will show you how good or bad your donation process is, and we'll even give you a few tips on how to optimize it. But there was a lot of friction that we found that can be eliminated. And then we also found that not all payment types are equal. So almost every organization accepted credit cards, but only a third accepted EFT or ACH or kind of automated bank donations. This was particularly kind of surprising or interesting because the median retention rate for EFT donors, according to the Target Analytics Group, is 4% higher than credit cards. So again, 4%, maybe not that much, but when you think about that growing chasm over time and how valuable recurring donors are, that's a significant amount of revenue. And you think about how often credit cards go expired or lost or canceled versus a bank account. Bankrate estimates that the average bank account is open for 16 years. So when it comes to just retention, not on the communication side, but more on the customer service side, we'll talk a little bit about setting up ACH or EFT or automated bank withdrawals is much, much more effective. But only a third of organizations did that. Plus there's lower fees. So we actually ran an experiment with this to see if it would have a negative impact. This is 5981 in the research library, where we just had credit card payment and then we just added the ACH option, and we found that it increased lifetime value by 55.2%. And again, what's important here is that there was no significant difference in conversion rate between the two forms. So people who wanted to use credit card, no problem, same conversion rate. People who did want to set up bank account, it was only about 15%, I believe, but those who did, it helped dramatically increase the lifetime value. So another thing that you can try is add that EFT ACH payment option. Here's just a simple example where you just kind of credit card or pay by check, put in your banking account, boom, you're on your way. All right, the other thing is there wasn't very much to do after a donation. So we just donated, now what? Again, if you think about that kind of rocket ship and cognitive and decision-making momentum, we've kind of reached the peak and made that decision to donate. Hopefully we get this great thank you and confirmation page. We're flying high, we got the endorphins kicking in, we're feeling good. Now what do we do? Well, a third of organizations didn't really suggest anything for us to do. Not social share, not anything. But very few organizations actually suggested something that was more kind of action oriented in terms of financial, or how to maximize financial benefit. So employer match was one, second gift, only 4 organizations, or an upgrade gift, only 4 organizations. Here's one example that we saw. It's maybe not the best example, it kind of has a few different conflicting calls to action, but you can see how they're talking about doubling your donation and going through an employer gift matching program. That can be an easy thing for donors to do on the confirmation page, check with their employer, double their donation. And then they go into their kind of value proposition about becoming a monthly donor and how someone could upgrade from a one-time to a monthly donor right here on the confirmation page. And again, that might be counterintuitive, like they just made a donation and now we're gonna ask them for a donation again. But again, it's this concept of kind of momentum and rolling. And we've actually done this quite a bit. We've done it from email acquisition into donation, but we've also done it from donation into second gift. We found that somewhere between 10% to 20% of donors will give a second gift if immediately prompted, and the process is made easy. That's also key. The process needs to be easy. And the key source here is Kevin. He's our CTO. This stat kind of exists in his brain. So if you have a problem with it, you got to take it up with Kevin. All right, so one of the things you can try is asking for a recurring gift on that confirmation page. Again, you need to communicate the value and answer that question of why, but the momentum is already going. So it's definitely worth a shot and worth a test. Okay, we're flying through some of the things that we learned here. It's not that easy to find out where to make a recurring donation. It's not that clear why you should become a recurring donor. And it wasn't that easy to actually set it up. And after the donation, there wasn't much to do. And here were those 8 ideas. I won't go over them all. You can find them in the recording or the PDF later. Okay, so that was on the giving side. Now the second half of this study was all about, well, what did organizations do in terms of communication to us as a one-time upgraded or recurring donor? So here's some of what we found. The first thing was recurring donors aren't treated that differently, actually. We found that 38% of organizations did not change their email strategy for recurring donors. Now 38% isn't, the majority, but when you think about email was the only channel that every organization in the whole study used and had significantly more volume than any other channel. The donor experience with all that email volume and little change, it ended up feeling like they were treated pretty similarly to the other donors. So they weren't treated that differently. And if we look at it by channel, again, all this kind of channel analysis per donor, it's all in the study. I'm just highlighting a couple of key points, particularly around recurring donors here and how they were different than one-time donors. We saw they actually got 10% fewer emails. They got 60% more calls or voicemails. I found this really surprising. They ended up getting 44% more direct mail in the 3 months and 50% fewer text messages, but it was a pretty small amount that even sent texts. So that was by channel, but if we look at message types, we categorized the messages into 3 buckets. One was receipt, very transactional, acknowledging the gift. Cultivation, this is basically anything that wasn't a very clear direct ask. So news and content, as long as the primary focus wasn't giving, it was cultivation. And then solicitations. These are any mail or email that was focused primarily to generate support. So we kind of scored them all and found the ratio. And for recurring donors, we ended up getting less appeals, which is good. And we ended up getting more cultivation compared to the other donor types, which I think is also good. So more cultivation, less solicitation, right? We're giving every month already, so that should be a good thing. But here's what was a little concerning. When we charted out the number of organizations that were sending those types of communications, receipt, cultivation, and solicitation over the 3-month period, you see this kind of concerning trend line where the number of organizations doing cultivation started to go down and the number of organizations doing solicitation started to go up. If we did this, we did the same chart, but we looked at volume or frequency. So not just number of organizations, but how many messages we actually received. We find the same type of similar trend line where the number of cultivation by volume started going down and the volume of solicitation started going up. Now, what this hints at, I mean, it's only 3 months, so we can't say for certain, but what this hints at is that there's a gap in our strategy in how we treat recurring donors that's pretty short-term focused. Maybe for a month or 2, we can kind of acknowledge them differently, treat them differently, but it looks like potentially over time, recurring donors just kind of make their way back into the normal bucket and get treated a lot like any other type of donor, which I don't think is a positive thing in terms of growing lifetime value and really treating our donors well. So one of the things that we should look at is, what is your longer term plan? Not just the 1 month after and the acknowledgement. How do you want to treat recurring donors differently well after the donation beyond 2 months? And I would suggest having one that is specific to recurring donors that looks all year, not just 1 or 2 months. The other kind of worrying trend that we saw when we looked at communication types is this sharp decline in the number of organizations that ended up sending receipts. It went all the way down to just 9 organizations that were sending receipts by month 3. Now, if you remember this kind of happiness diminishing returns curve, you only really get the benefit of giving frequently if you get acknowledged for giving it, right? If it just comes off your bank account and you see it on a bank statement, I think it's hard to really get that warm glow, good feeling about your recurring gift. So there's some reasons why people, don't send receipts out. Maybe like it's a consolidated statement and it's under the guise of efficiency. But I wonder if some of it is that we end up treating recurring donors like this. We think that this is my cat Thor, who's actually a terror. That's a good representation of him. We're like, if we communicate to them, we're worried they're just gonna like snap our hand off and say, stop my donation. I don't want to donate to you anymore. But really, I think we should be treating recurring donors more like this. This is my dog Melly. She's just a big old love fluff ball, right? Communicate value, say thank you, give them a receipt, acknowledge it. Yes, it takes some effort. Yes, it takes some cost, but it's worthwhile to the donor. And remember that lifetime value, it is absolutely worthwhile to you. So one idea you should try sending a thank you or receipt every single month. See if that has a difference. You can run a longitudinal test to see if it actually makes a significant difference on donor retention rate, or you can just start doing this because it's a good practice in honoring and stewarding the donor. All right, another thing we found is that phone and text were not used very often. You maybe picked that up on an earlier chart that we showed, but voicemail, only 15 organizations called us, and text, only 2 organizations texted us. So what's interesting here is you'll often see a lot of best practices focus on phone in terms of upgrading or converting donors. But just on the kind of retention side, this is from Penelope Burke, she found that just by calling a donor, the second year value could be up to 40% higher just by receiving a thank you call. So one of the simplest things I think you can do to help increase retention and that lifetime value for all donors, but particularly recurring, is try calling or maybe texting your donors. We didn't see a lot of text. We haven't done a ton of text, but definitely call and maybe experiment with text. Now, why so little usage? I think one of the reasons is this. Only 1 out of 4 nonprofits actually collected a phone number on their donation. Now, this is partly because of what I showed you earlier. When the cell phone was required on this form, it helped decrease donations 43%. But in this test where the phone was just optional, not required, there was no significant difference. And so even if there is a dip or a slight dip or no significant difference, you have to weigh the pros and cons of having the phone, being able to thank, steward, and connect if you have a plan versus the potential drop off in conversion rate by adding that extra field. So I think the pros probably outweighs the cons, but if you do it, make the phone number optional, not mandatory. Otherwise, you'll see a pretty large spike, or I would imagine you'd see a pretty large spike. So maybe try making the phone number, but again, the key point here is if you're going to actually use it, collecting data and information just to kind of tuck it away for a rainy day because we may do a thank you call campaign in 9 months, that's a risky venture because you could be losing out on donations and engagement opportunities up until that point. So if you have a plan for the phone, great. If you don't, maybe don't. And in either case, think about making it optional. Another thing we found with communications is that they weren't very personal. So 9% of organizations did not send any communications to their monthly donors. Okay, so Captain Obvious, communicate to your monthly donors. And when we scored at receipt solicitation cultivation, we found that 13% of organizations did not send cultivation content to any of the donors, not the one time, not the upgrade or the recurring. So it's not a huge number, but that's nothing across 3 different types of donors. So Captain Obvious again, try cultivating all your donors, send them content that's not just a receipt and not just another solicitation or ask. Okay, so that's the obvious stuff, but if we dig just a little bit deeper, we found that only 1 in 5 organizations sent us a message from an email address that represented a real person. Just 1 out of 5. The vast majority of emails came from things like info at, about, or these kind of generic no reply type email addresses. And so the end feeling was something that was kind of cold, like this. Subject, donation form acknowledgement from donor receipt. Doesn't feel like a great warm experience about giving. Or people would call us, hey, friend or partner. And it's like, well, we just filled out a form with our first name and you're calling me friend. So there's either a process or a systems breakdown, or there's just a non-attempt to be more personal or relevant to the donors in our communications. And this is important because people triage their inboxes by sender name and subject line, as well as preview text. And what we found is that by sending emails from a person, in this case, we sent it from Kent Lastman versus Competitive Enterprise Institute, the organization, helped increase email opens 28%. And this is a pattern that we see a lot actually throughout our email experiment library if you want to check it out. But the personal email send often has a higher open or engagement rate. So try sending your emails from a person, not an organization. And then subject line, this is just one example of a bunch where we saw difference in subject lines. So moms, the heart equals the heart of CaringBridge versus you amaze me, Jeff. The you amaze me, Jeff helped increase email opens 137%. Now there's a few different things that we changed, obviously the sender and even the preview text, but the subject line was one of them. And it plays on this cue of you, or using the person's name. Just by saying you and using their name, we love hearing our own name. It really helps increase engagement and stands out in the inbox. So one of the things you should try is try using you in your subject lines. And further to that point, here's an experiment where we just tested using the first name on an email. So on the left, no first name. On the right, first name, just hi Jeff. The only difference, 270% increase in clicks. We love hearing our own name. We love being talked to as a real person. So try using the person's first name. You have it, use it. And then what about customer service emails? We found that these were also kind of cold and transactional. So when our card was reported as lost, 62% of the emails we received were transactional. And when the card was reported as canceled, 82% of the emails came back as transactional. Again, this is the customer service side where we should be helping and reaching out, and these come across very cold and like machines and robots, like please update your credit card. And it's not a great feeling if you're a donor. And now, even if you didn't care about that and you just wanted to recapture these lost credit cards, there's a good argument for sending emails from a person. We did an inbox analysis. It's in the study that you can download, where we looked at where emails went in Gmail, inbox, promotions, or spam. And every single email that was sent from a real person, granted there wasn't a ton of them, but every single one made it to the inbox as opposed to the promotions or spam filter. So even if you were just trying to find your way into the inbox, sending an email from a real person is a better strategy or way to go. So this principle of personal emails that look, sound, and feel like they're from a person, I think applies to customer service emails as well. A mantra that we have here, and if you've taken any of our other courses or something like that, you've probably seen this expression. This is a chart actually in our office, but people give to people, not email machines. It's a common thread throughout our whole course, which talks more about personalization of email, nextafter.com/email. Now that was all about email, but what about some of the other channels? When we looked at phone, here was one example of a voicemail we received. Hello, my name is a paid caller from MDS calling on behalf of organization. I'm calling today to thank you for your generous partner. So what do you think the problem is with this phone message? This part, I'm a paid caller calling on behalf of. I don't think it's a great idea to outsource your personal thank you to paid vendors who have to identify themselves as paid vendors. Now, that could just be me, but that doesn't come across very personal. We also saw this in mail, right? Friend, partner, account number, being treated more like a dollar or a transaction as opposed to a person. So this mantra of people give to people, not email machines, I think it's just people give to people, and it should apply to different channels like phone and mail. And we didn't see a lot of that in the study. The last key point here on communications is that customer service kind of left much to be desired. I've talked a lot about the customer service side, about how few organizations were sending receipts by month 3, the number of organizations that weren't sending cultivation communication, the number of organizations that didn't communicate at all, and how the majority of communications, both customer service and, I'm using air quotes, mass, did not feel very personal. That's part of cultivation and customer service, and it's hugely important. Roger Craver, who's founder and author of The Agitator, great blog, he's doing research for retention fundraising, and this is what he found when it comes to improving lifetime value, the only true metric that matters. Thank you, Roger. The tactics, techniques, and frequency of activity from the fundraising department, primarily asking, accounts for less than 20% of the ultimate value on a donor file. How we treat donors, thank them, communicate them, and the systems and processes we have accounts for the bulk of the lifetime value, not just how much we ask and how often. So the communications and cultivation side is so important, and that's why those trends of solicitation going up and cultivation going down is maybe not a great thing in the long term, and maybe why we experience these pretty low donor retention rates in the 20s for one-time donors and in the 40s for overall. All right, I'll get off my high horse and come back to recurring. So we reported one card is lost and the other is canceled to see what would happen. So for the lost card, here's what we found. Just about 2 out of 3 organizations had the way to automatically update these credit cards when they were lost without any intervention, which is great. It's a seamless tool. So the first kind of key thing here is look at your payment provider or your tools or technology and see if there's a way or a switch for them to auto update these credit cards, because that's great. You don't have to reach out and risk the opportunity or risk losing a donor just because a credit card got lost. But for those that didn't have that, a quarter of them didn't contact us at all about a lost card. And canceled card, fewer than half of nonprofits, 47%, did not reach out to us at all about the new card in this analysis window. So what this hints at is that there's a breakdown in systems and communication. So again, when we reached out, it wasn't very personal, it was very transactional, but we also don't seem to have these kind of systems or tools or flags or something in place to make sure we can recover that credit card. And the longer that kind of time goes by without getting that credit card, the chances of that donor coming back are going to go down and down. And again, because lifetime value is the driving metric here, it's imperative to have this response plan for if and when cards are lost or canceled and not auto updated, so that you can get the card back and continue on engaging with the donor and continuing to get that lifetime value benefit. Another thing here is if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. The great Peter Drucker said that. So another suggestion is maybe make this a metric that someone on your team tracks. Hey, how many lost cards? How many canceled cards? What's a recaptured rate? Put it on the wall, put it on a dashboard, make someone responsible for it to figure out that plan. Because if the card expires and the donor walks out, you're losing on a lot of opportunity there. All right, so some of what we learned there to recap: recurring donors aren't treated that differently. Phone and text were not used very often. The communications overall were not very personal, and the customer service, I think, leaves much to be desired. I gave you more than 6 ideas. Some of them were kind of sub-bullets, but those are the 6 ideas. Again, I won't go over them all. And we kind of raced through some of that. I wanted to cover all those elements. There's more that I wanted to cover, but if you want to dive deeper, you can get the full study, nextafter.com/recurring. It goes into things like gift arrays and premiums, the communication analysis by verticals and month to month per donor type. You can see all those charts. And we tried to litter it with tons of ideas for you to kind of experiment and test about making it easier and finding it, and inbox placement, appeals, communication, how to win back lapsed cards. So if you enjoyed this at all, I would highly recommend you check out that full study. And again, it's at nextafter.com/recurring. All right, so you hung in there. We have a few minutes for questions. We'll see Nathan, Tim, if we have some, we'll take them. And if we don't get to them, we'll do our best to email you and get back to you in that way.
Great, Brady. Thank you so much. Very insightful, inspiring, discouraging, and encouraging all at the same time. So kind of like a cocktail of emotion, I guess, for most of us. We do have a number of questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can in the time that we have allotted, and we can maybe go over just a little bit. First question comes from Katie. She says, what kind of language can we use to refer to recurring donors other than members or membership? This is an organization that has all of their donors considering themselves already members. So how can they differentiate this recurring program from their general donor population?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, there's some specifics about like what membership actually gets you versus what recurring giving actually gets you. One of the ways that you could potentially do it is with like a named giving program. Again, only 21% of organizations in the study had a named giving program. And even if some of the benefits are somewhat similar, even having a different name, so join the program versus, get your membership, could be one way. And then the other is maybe instead of referring to people as members, you could kind of refer to people as, donor champions or heroes, or kind of tweak the language a little bit in that regard. Again, without knowing the specifics of membership, those are maybe 2 quick ideas.
Yeah, and we've seen things like President's Circle or Director's Circle or sustaining member is another way to differentiate that. So I think that those are some great ideas. On the donation form, should we default to a one-time gift or recurring gift? And this question comes from Rolf. And Brady, I think we actually have an experiment that showcases what happens when you choose one or the other.
Yes, we do. And we had it originally and we just ran out of time. I think we maybe covered in the study, but one of the things that we found, both for gift arrays in terms of trying to position the higher gift amount first and pre-selecting what we want them to do, we've got a couple experiments that show that actually decreased the conversion rate. And by kind of freeing up donors and not assuming what we know or what we want them to do, and kind of empowering them to make their own decision and relying on value proposition and kind of copy and why they should do what we want them to do instead of forcing it upon them, it actually leads to greater conversion rate and even more lifetime value. So it's something potentially worth testing, but we have a little bit of research that shows defaulting into monthly is kind of non-significant and even could hurt. And on the gift array side, kind of starting with higher amounts can also depress giving, even though it's maybe counterintuitive.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't really fully understand the reasons why we observe some of the results we do when we test things like that. But one theory is that we should be trying to empower our donors and let them know that they have control at every single point in the transaction, in the journey. And we try to, potentially guide them down a path maybe they don't want to go, or heaven forbid, deceive them. That never tends to end up well.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so this is a question very specifically referring to that experiment we ran. I think it was with Focus on the Family, where as the person is going through the process of actually completing a one-time gift, we actually disrupt that flow. And we present them with a pop-up message that says, instead of giving this one-time gift, would you rather give a recurring gift of a lesser amount? The question comes from Emily, and she says, does that happen right before they submit their donation, or is it a pop-up that just happens on the donation page itself?
Good question. It happens right before they complete the one-time donation.
Right.
So they'll
So they're actually in the
they're
process of
starting.
actually completing, the transaction,
They've
which is
selected an
very
amount.
risky. It's risky,
Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, and I think potentially that's something, to test, is saying like, how late is too late or how early is too early. But part of the idea is there's some tools, and that's where they put it, and that's where we saw it. So we're like, well, let's start there, and we found that it
Right.
produced a lift. And I think again, it's part of that momentum. If you do it too early, they maybe go, oh, I don't want to recur, and actually, I won't do a one-time either. So you have to get them to actually make a decision to get further down that path, and even putting in the amount and even sometimes their information. It seems risky, but it also seems to be working. But yeah, it happens right before they click submit or complete.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And that's something we're going to continue to test in our lab here, and hopefully we'll have some more data points to be able to back that up with different organizations that test the same kind of thing. Great, thanks, Brady. Next question comes from Michelle. She said, what's the best way to add copy to a donation page without adding friction? I'll go ahead and take this one in the interest of time. Michelle, it's impossible. Anytime you add copy to a landing page, you are adding length friction to the page. You're requiring somebody to have to invest more time and mental energy reading your copy. However, on the opposing side of friction is the idea of value. And oftentimes what we find happens in many of our donation pages is that they are all friction and no value. So what I would suggest is start by having the clearest and most compelling case laid out, and test that versus your control, and then gradually over time scale back the amount of copy on that page until you find the place where you reach the diminishing returns. So great question. Okay, here's a question from Christine. Christine says, isn't it annoying for a monthly donor to have to receive a thank you each month? What do you think about that one, Brady?
I'd say two things. One, I guess it depends on the thank you. Like if it's a crappy thank you, then of course that's annoying. But the other thing I'd say, why would someone not want to get thanked, acknowledged, and rewarded for an action that they did? I don't know how that can be annoying. So I think that one is maybe us projecting onto donors, which is always a dangerous thing. Or two, maybe kind of depends on what the thank you actually is. And then you can always have, a donor can always say, hey, please don't send me this. It's dangerous. Donors will tell you, don't send me mail. Don't send me thank you letters. And you stop sending mail, you stop sending thank you letters, they stop giving. So, do that at your own peril. But I think making them value add and acknowledging donors, I don't think that's very annoying.
Yeah, and I remember as we were going through the data and looking at some of these emails, some of the emails I saw would actually present a different story of impact each month. And it's reminding the donor that that sustaining pledge they've made of support that they're constantly pouring into the organization is continuing to deliver impact results, and hopefully making the world a little bit better place. Now, I will say that I know that I've debated this with other people, and I've heard that one of the reasons why people don't send monthly communications to the recurring donors, they don't want to remind them that they're giving every month. And I said, I think that that's actually a pretty, not even a slippery slope. I think it actually crosses the line of actually being disingenuous and maybe even a little bit deceptive. So, I understand that once we get somebody to make that commitment, we want them to keep that commitment forever, but trying to mask the fact that they're constantly giving to the organization, I think is probably the wrong approach to take.
Yeah, and it's similar to that kind of gaming the system for bending them to our will, right? Like we should empower them, and a trend is like cancel anytime. It's communications. You allow them to unsubscribe. If you're not communicating value, if a donor doesn't want to give to you, don't force them to. That's a bad long-term strategy for everyone.
Okay, so Brady, I know that we're 2 minutes over time, so I know that folks may have to leave, but we'll hang out here and try and answer a few more questions before we take off here. Somebody asked a question about, you're talking about personalization, and I know that we're very big on personalization because personalization is a form of relevance, right? Your things are more relevant when it's addressed to me. What if you don't have the first person, the name of the person on your email file? What if you don't have their first name? Is it better to say friend or, fellow world changer, or just not use a greeting at all? What do you think?
I'd say option D behind, mystery door. Work hard to get the first name. It's hugely important. So, if that's currently not on forms, really look at doing it. If you don't have it, I think a greeting is better than none. I mean, you can test it, but starting with a blank email as opposed to some kind of greeting, neither of them are great options. They're both kind of giveaways like, we don't know your name, which isn't a good way to start a communication. Again, why getting the name is so important. But generally, my default at least is some kind of greeting. And sometimes you can go, I think at Next After we use Fellow Optimizer. So if you get that, there you go. But yeah, something that's kind of unique and not friend.
Which I can't stand, by the way. And since we haven't actually tested that directly, and we're kind of entering into the world of speculation, and we're just kind of blowing around opinions, I would suggest maybe just not having anything at all. By having dear friend or dear fellow optimizer, you're actually drawing attention to the fact that I don't know who you are, right? I'd almost rather just start the message and see what happens. But you know what, Brady?
Test it. There you go.
Exactly.
But get the name.
Okay, a few more here. Let's see. How can I promote a monthly giving program via social media, and how often should I push it?
Good question. So frequency, I'd say that's something that you're gonna have to figure out. I know actually one of the things at Neo Summit, we've got Amy Zhang coming from Charity Water to talk specifically about how they're using Facebook ads to acquire brand new recurring donors from digital. And I think that's actually a really smart approach. It's something that we've seen successful on the one-time donor side. So using something like Facebook ads, I think could be a really powerful way. Again, communicate value proposition, have a good dedicated kind of landing page that furthers that value prop, nice, easy donation flow. If you're pushing people from social media or an ad to a bad donation page or something that doesn't talk about recurring giving, it's going to be kind of a waste of time, energy, and money. So if you're going to invest in kind of the acquisition side, you really got to think about that continuity and keeping it all the way through. But something like Facebook ads is definitely worth trying, and you can come to the conference and learn more about how Charity Water does it.
Okay, last question, because I think we're now 5 minutes over time. This question comes from Linda. How can we acquire emails and phone numbers for people that we only have a mailing address for? Brady, there's a couple ways we can do that.
Yeah, good question. There are some kind of vendors and servicers that do kind of like appends, where they can actually kind of like cross-reference and kind of collect that information through other sources and give it to you. There's other ways that you can do it through like surveys, or you can do content offers sometimes to the same people. If you have an address or something like that, sometimes you can find them online. You can send them like a quiz or a content offer, and by acquiring through that method, you'll get the email and then match it up to your records. Those are kind of two different ways that you can go about filling out your file.
And if you're not scared to death of what Facebook does with your data, you can actually take your direct mail list and upload it to Facebook, and they can actually match your direct mail lists with people that are on their network, and you can then serve ads directly to those people. So that's another way that you could actually re-engage those people and perhaps have people opt in to receive your communications as opposed to just being appended blindly. So everybody, thank you so much for questions. If we haven't answered it on the broadcast, we will respond to those directly. I think we've got the whole list of those, and Nathan's gonna take care of that. We will also be preparing the video archive of today's broadcast, links to all the experiments, and of course, the link where you can actually download the nonprofit recurring giving benchmark study. We thank you again for being part of today's webinar. Very, very grateful for the work that you do every single day. You guys are our heroes, and we thank you and look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Bye-bye.
Salesforce.org is a social enterprise born out of Salesforce.com. And, a lot of people have heard about the Salesforce 1-1-1 model, which is how Salesforce gives back to their community. Through the birth and evolution of Salesforce.org, this has actually evolved into 3 different ways that we give back to the community and try to make an impact and help make the world a better place. And those 3 ways are through our technology. Those are the solutions that we build that I'm going to talk a little bit about today. Through our investment in the community, financial investment, we create grants for technology and for workforce development, and through our community. The Salesforce community and our partners are all encouraged to volunteer and to give back. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about the technology. At the heart of our technology strategy is our solutions built specifically to address the challenges nonprofits face as they work to make an impact in the world. And this set of solutions is the Salesforce.org Nonprofit Cloud. With Nonprofit Cloud, organizations can track and measure their programs in real time, raise more resources by unlocking their data, and take every constituent on a personalized journey to impact. Nonprofit Cloud is a true impact platform that provides organizations with a complete 360-degree view of their constituents and puts the enterprise power and flexibility of Salesforce, the world's #1 CRM, at their fingertips. And what's really unique about Nonprofit Cloud is that we've built it in partnership with a community of over 34 nonprofit trailblazers. And we work with trailblazers large and small all across the world that are using Salesforce to move their missions forward. Whether you're feeding the homeless, building homes, cleaning up beaches, helping communities recover from disasters, or investing in the next generation, we build technology that can help you accelerate your impact. And we know this is effective because our customers are telling us how we've been able to help them make more impact. They're using Salesforce to deliver better programs, to raise more resources, to engage with their constituents, overall increasing their impact. And when we asked our customers, 89% of them have told us that Salesforce has improved their ability to achieve their mission. For some, it's decreasing their cost per dollar raised or helping them retain their donors. At every step of the way, technology can help them make a greater impact. So how do we begin? How do we make this impact? And how do we help organizations? Well, it all starts with engagement and knowing how to engage your constituents where they are, about the causes that they care about, and on the channel of their choice. Nonprofit Cloud gives you the tools to manage communications with your constituents across every channel, including email, mobile, web, ads, social. Help you get your word out to your supporters, your advocates, and your future donors. And once you've connected with your audience, that audience that cares about your cause, you can easily design and automate constituent journeys with an intuitive user interface to empower everyone in your organization to do this work. And we also help you to create online communities so that your constituents can connect with your organization and each other, providing new opportunities for more engagement and deeper engagement. This is all important and powerful, but engagement alone isn't enough because you need to appeal to donors to fund your mission. And Nonprofit Cloud's fundraising capability helps fundraising teams to raise more resources overall by helping you acquire, grow, and retain your donor base. Nonprofit Cloud gives you a complete view of your donors, your prospects, your households, and it's all in one place, so you can access it from anywhere. And your fundraising team can track and manage the donation cycle from the very first pledge to the payment, all while engaging donors with the right message and the right time. And of course, being able to measure and report on that fundraising success with reports and with dashboards. And the beautiful thing about the way that we built our product is that we have an ecosystem of partner apps to meet any other fundraising needs, including online fundraising, wealth data, and more. But the true power of this platform is bringing marketing and fundraising together, and all of this to become a connected nonprofit. So when you're engaging your constituents across all communication channels, Salesforce allows you to then raise more funds with the tools and the data to be more successful with your appeals or your stewardship. This means that you as fundraisers can effectively steward that prospective donor and major gift to a close by working seamlessly with your marketing team. When you've integrated your CRM and your marketing, you capture better data on your prospective donors from every engagement point. And you can segment and score your supporters based on how much they engage with you and their giving history, and then automatically personalize these communications based on that data with very little additional effort. And Salesforce can also help you manage your grants, your earned income, and more depending on what your needs are. And so bringing it all together on a single platform, Salesforce.org Nonprofit Cloud helps you drive more impact and move your mission forward by helping every part of your organization work in tandem.